The summer air over North Grove Airfield shimmered with heat, humming with the distant churn of engines and the clatter of wheels against tarmac. Above the hangars, seagulls danced in lazy arcs, barely interested in the men and women below coordinating the comings and goings of polished private jets. It was a place of quiet money and hushed luxury, a world designed for CEOs, celebrities and diplomats, people who never looked back when the jet door sealed shut. But this story doesn't begin with a billionaire or a jet. It begins with a girl. Her name was Rosie Cartwright. 10 years old, her brown curls tied up in a messy ponytail and her cheeks smudged with grease. Rosie didn't belong to the world of suits and glass towers. She belonged to Hangar 3, the one near the edge of the field where her grandfather, Walter, worked as a mechanic. Rosie had been visiting him since she was 5, learning what a wrench was before she could spell it. Rosie wasn't supposed to be near the jets, especially not the ones scheduled for takeoff. But curiosity didn't care about rules. That morning, while Walter refilled coolant on a rusted crop duster, Rosie spotted it. A sleek, cream-colored Falcon 8X jet parked just outside the next hangar. It gleamed in the sunlight like a polished tooth, with its tail proudly stamped with a golden falcon crest. The pilot and co-pilot were gone, the ground crew temporarily distracted. It was a perfect storm of boredom, mischief, and unsupervised imagination. Before the story begins, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Tomorrow's episode is extra special, and tell me where you're watching this video from below. Rosie walked over slowly, her sneakers crunching lightly on the gravel. She wore her oversized denim coveralls like armor, the sleeves rolled and the knees dirt-stained. In her hand was a small red toolbox. It was mostly filled with candy wrappers, a pair of goggles, and one actual screwdriver. But she carried it like it was made of gold. "Captain Rosie, ready for pre-flight inspection," she whispered to herself. The cabin door had been left open. Just the ramp, nothing else. Rosie knew better than to go inside. But the engine, well, that was outside. Fair game. She climbed a side ladder, pulled herself up onto the narrow maintenance platform, and grinned. Her eyes danced across the silver. Casing of the starboard engine. She tapped the engine housing with her tiny screwdriver and nodded thoughtfully, as if discovering something only an expert would see. She unscrewed a small access panel, just 3 turns, and then for effect screwed it right back in. It was a joke, of course, just a game. She wasn't really fixing the plane, but someone else saw something very different. At exactly 11:24 a.m., a black Bentley SUV pulled up to the runway's edge. Out stepped a man in a crisp, tailored suit, sunglasses pressed to his face, and the unmistakable gait of someone too busy to waste time. Calvin McKinley, 45, billionaire entrepreneur, founder of Skyrhythm Technologies, jet-setter, known in headlines as the man who digitized air travel, known to investors as the boss who never misses a flight. Today was supposed to be quick, fly to Geneva, close a merger, be home by midnight. He didn't expect delays. He never had them. As he approached the jet, his assistant Mason scurried. Beside him, tablet in hand, rattling off logistics. Flight plan filed, Geneva ETA at 18:05 local. Your pilot, Captain Drew, is finishing his pre-flight. McKinley held up a hand. Quiet. His eyes were locked on the engine, more specifically, the girl standing next to it. What the hell? Rosie looked down and froze. A tall man in a business suit was staring at her like she was some kind of bomb. She immediately dropped her screwdriver, which clattered to the tarmac below. Her legs trembled slightly, but she refused to run. That would mean guilt. Instead, she gripped the edge of the platform and leaned down. "I wasn't doing anything, just checking something," she said defensively. Mason blinked. "Sir, I'll get security." "No," McKinley interrupted, stepping closer. "Let her come down." Rosie hesitated. "I'm not in trouble, am I?" "You might be," McKinley said, folding his arms. "But that depends. Did you touch anything important? Rosie bit her lip. No, sir, I just pretended. I didn't even open anything that wasn't supposed to open. I was just playing. He sighed and gestured for her to climb down. She did slowly, legs wobbling slightly on the last rung. When her feet touched the ground, McKinley's eyes scanned her up and down. That's when he saw it. Around her neck, tucked beneath her collar, was a small, aged pin, gold, with outstretched wings and a central badge, a vintage pilot's wing, the kind issued by Air Force academies decades ago. McKinley reached forward without thinking. That pin. Where did you get that? Rosie looked at him, puzzled. It was my grandpa's. He gave it to me before he got too sick to come to the hangar anymore. McKinley's voice lowered. What was his name? Walter Cartwright. Silence. The name struck him like a brick. He took off his sunglasses, eyes narrowing. Walter Cartwright was my father's co-pilot, 1972, Alaska route. He's the reason I'm alive. Rosie blinked. Wait, really? I was just a baby when the plane iced over. My dad was going to crash it. But Walter took control, saved everyone. Her voice softened. He never told me that. He wouldn't have. He was never one to brag. McKinley looked down at her toolbox, bent and battered, but proudly carried. He looked at her grease-streaked face, her stubborn stance, the spark in her eyes. You were pretending to fix a jet, he said finally. But I think you were doing more than pretending. Rosie shuffled awkwardly. I want to be a pilot someday, or a mechanic, or both. Ambitious. Is that bad? He smiled. No, it's the best kind of dangerous. Within the hour, McKinley delayed the flight. Not cancelled. Just delayed. He spent the next 30 minutes sitting on the hangar steps with Rosie, talking about jets, mechanics, and the old days when flying wasn't luxury, it was life. She told him about Walter's stories, about the patchwork aircraft held together with hope and duct tape, about the crashes that almost happened, and the ones that never did. He told her about being a lonely kid in the back of prop planes, watching sky through glass, never knowing why his father loved it so much, until he got older. When it was finally time to leave, McKinley reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in velvet. He handed it to Rosie. She unwrapped it slowly. Another pin. Newer, gold, wings even wider. This one, McKinley said, is for the future. Your future. Rosie looked at it, then at him. I didn't fix your plane, he winked. Maybe not, but you fixed something else. And with that, the man who had everything stepped into his jet with a lighter heart than he'd had in years. And a little. Girl watched the plane soar, standing tall with 2 pins on her chest and 1,000 dreams in her heart. The following Monday brought rain. Not the gentle kind that tiptoes across rooftops, but the thick, soaking kind that smacks the earth like it's trying to knock something loose. The airfield looked like a washed-out film set, silver and grey, with puddles forming between every hangar, the kind of day you'd expect to stay indoors. But Rosie was already in her boots, raincoat and determination before Walter even finished his coffee. She had a mission. Last week hadn't just been a fluke to her, it had been the beginning of something real. Calvin McKinley had handed her a pin, a symbol, not of what she had done, but what she could do. And Rosie wasn't about to waste that. She wasn't pretending anymore. Walter looked over the rim of his mug as his granddaughter clumped into the garage. You're early, he said. I've got something to fix, she replied. He chuckled. It's Monday, Rosie. Ain't nothing broken yet. She pointed at the old hydraulic tow cart in the corner. That wheel's been crooked for 2 weeks. Walter raised an eyebrow, impressed. You noticed that? I felt it, she said. It pulled left when I moved the Baron last Thursday. Walter lowered his mug. Something was changing. Rosie had always been a sharp kid, but this was something else. She wasn't playing anymore. She was paying attention. Later that morning, a dark sedan rolled through the front gates of North Grove. No Bentley this time, no entourage. Just Calvin McKinley, wearing jeans for the first time in a decade, and carrying something under his arm that looked suspiciously like a lunchbox. Rosie spotted him the second he walked into Hangar 3. "Hey, it's the jet guy." McKinley smiled. "Still wearing the pin?" Rosie beamed. "Every day." Walter stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. He recognized the man instantly now. "McKinley," he muttered, his voice a shade of disbelief. Calvin turned. "You still look like you could fly a 727 with nothing but duct tape and spit, Mr. Cartwright." Walter snorted. "Last time I tried. That we almost ended up in Lake Huron." Rosie stared between them. "Wait, you know each other?" Walter crossed his arms. "I flew with his father. For years. Good man. Real flyer." Rosie blinked. "But you never said anything. You never asked." By noon, the three of them sat in the hangar, eating sandwiches under the watchful gaze of a half-disassembled propeller. Rosie had grease on her cheek, Walter had a faraway look in his eyes, and McKinley had something to say. "I'm opening a foundation," he began, "for kids who want to fly, or fix, or both. It's going to be based here." Walter raised an eyebrow. "Here, in North Grove." "This hangar," McKinley nodded. "Rosie gave me the idea." Rosie dropped her sandwich. "Wait, me?" "You saw something no one else did," McKinley said. "You saw a world that didn't belong to you and walked into it anyway." Rosie went quiet. "Then, does that mean I can be in it?" "You'll be the first in it." Walter smiled quietly, hiding pride behind his coffee. Days passed. Rosie began spending more time at the hangar, not just playing now, learning. Walter showed her how to run diagnostics, how to inspect flaps for microfractures, how to listen to an engine and hear what it needed. McKinley brought in engineers, pilots, mentors from across the country, some old, some young, all carrying stories like torchlight. The foundation got a name, Wings Over Water, inspired by the story Walter had told about landing a Beechcraft over Lake Michigan on nothing but faith and muscle. Rosie's story, her quiet, playful joke with a screwdriver, had ignited something much larger. She was now its heart. Then one afternoon the phone rang. Walter took the call in silence. He didn't speak when he hung up, didn't smile when Rosie asked who it was. He just turned, stared at the toolbox she'd left on the bench, and sighed. Rosie frowned. "What's wrong?" Walter finally spoke. That call was from the FAA. Her heart dropped. "Am I in trouble?" "No," he said gently. "Not you, me." "What did they want?" They want me to come in for a review, some of my licenses. They think I'm too old to certify aircraft without supervision." Rosie stared. "But that's stupid. You're the best mechanic in this place." Walter looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly. "Maybe once." "No," she insisted. "You're still the best." He didn't respond, just sat down. Slowly, the weight of years folding into his shoulders. That night, Rosie couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling in her tiny bedroom, the pilot pin resting on her nightstand, catching moonlight. Her grandfather was the reason she knew what she knew. If they took his license, it wasn't just paperwork, it was his identity. She made a choice. She was going to do something, not pretend, not joke. This time, she was going to fix something. For real, but she'd need help. The next morning, before the sun was up, Rosie was at Hangar 3. She'd scribbled a list on the back of a cereal box. At the top, Grandpa's license plan. Underneath, she'd written names: Calvin, Mason, two of the techs from Hangar 4, even old Jerry who managed the parts desk. She called it her mission team. When Calvin arrived, she marched up to him and handed him the box. "What's this?" he asked. "Operation Wings Stay Wide," she said. Calvin read through the list, then smiled. "You want to prove your grandpa's still the best." Rosie nodded. "If the FAA wants proof, we'll give them proof." He crouched to her level. "All right, Captain, let's fix this." And so they began. Over the next week, Rosie's plan unfolded like a blueprint. They organized a test session with multiple aircraft, each undergoing full diagnostic checks. Walter would lead each check, observed by active FAA-certified inspectors who had no idea they were walking into a demonstration. Each system Walter tested passed with near-perfect precision. He caught faults younger techs missed, predicted failures, before they showed up on data logs. And when one inspector asked how he'd known a circuit board was misaligned by 0.5 millimeter, Walter simply pointed at his ear. "I heard it hum wrong." At the end of the week, the FAA reinstated Walter's certification without hesitation and with a personal commendation. Rosie didn't brag. She just grinned as she handed her grandpa the red toolbox again. He opened it. Inside was a single, gold-pin, new, shiny, fresh from the wings over water foundation. Walter looked up. "Where'd you get this?" "I ordered it," Rosie said proudly. "I figured if you can still fly through a storm, you deserve the wings." Walter held the pin in his hand, his eyes misted. "Thank you, Rosie," she hugged him. "You're welcome, Grandpa." As they stood together, the roar of an incoming jet echoed across the field. Calvin stepped out of Hangar 4, waving. Rosie turned. "Think he'll let me fly it someday?" Walter chuckled. "I think he'll let you build it if you want." She smiled. "Maybe I will." Summer rolled in quietly, like a cat stretching across warm pavement. The air at North Grove was thick with sun and the scent of jet fuel, and Rosie Cartwright's boots scuffed a new path between Hangar 3 and the whiteboard now hanging near, the toolbox wall. On it, in purple marker, were 3 words underlined in confident loops: build, fly, teach. Wings over water was no longer an idea. It was a movement. Rosie had been promoted to Junior Apprentice-in-Chief, a title she'd made up, but that everyone else seemed to respect. She took her job seriously. At 10 years old, she coordinated tool assignments, passed inspection tags to senior engineers, and even wrote her own maintenance checklists, labeled with stickers. But today wasn't about stickers. It was about the whisper she heard last week, an overheard conversation between 2 visitors near Calvin McKinley's car. She fixed his jet, didn't she? The girl? What if it wasn't a fluke? Rosie had frozen in place when she heard it, not because it scared her, but because it challenged her. What if it was a fluke? What if she couldn't do it again? She needed to know, so today she would test herself. DE. Test subject was a battered 1968 Piper Cherokee that had been half forgotten in Hangar 5. It hadn't flown in over 5 years. Its propeller was crusted in rust, one wingtip dented from a bad landing long ago. Calvin had signed off on letting Rosie study it, but not fly it, of course. Walter supervised, but kept his distance. He knew this wasn't about fixing a plane. It was about proving something to herself. Rosie didn't touch the engine first. She started with the logbooks, the history, the soul of the aircraft. She read every scribbled note, every mechanic's entry. She traced the years like a detective, cracked mounts, worn seals. One field fix done with chewing gum and desperation. This was no pristine machine. It was real. Like her. By day 3, Rosie had diagrammed a full systems check. Walter looked over the chart and nodded, impressed. "You missed one thing," he said gently. "What?" "The smell." Rosie blinked. "The smell." Walter leaned into the cockpit and breathed deeply. "That's ethanol. Bad mix. Old gas. It's been leaking, small, slow. You won't see it in the lines until you pressure them." Rosie stared, then wrote, "Fuel line integrity test. Required." Meanwhile, Calvin was having a different kind of meeting. Inside the foundation office, just a retrofitted break room with 2 desks and a printer older than Rosie, Calvin sat with a woman in a pilot's uniform. Her name was Captain Ray Delgado, former Navy, logged more hours than most small airlines. "She's young," Ray said plainly, staring at Rosie through the dusty window. She's different, Calvin replied. That doesn't make her a mechanic. Calvin paused. It doesn't, but maybe it makes her more than one. Ray arched a brow. You want me to what? Train her or test her? Both. Why? Because she reminds me of my father, and I've never said that about anyone else. The next morning, Ray introduced herself with a brisk handshake and a clipboard. I'm here to make your life difficult, she said. Rosie grinned. Cool. I like difficult. The two clicked instantly. Ray didn't go easy. She asked hard questions, made Rosie explain torque ratios, engine compression theory, and the difference between aluminum and composite stress under cold weather conditions. Rosie answered as best she could, sometimes fumbling, often improvising. By week's end, Ray smiled. She's a sponge, and she thinks like a flyer. Calvin nodded. Then we give her the wings. But Rosie didn't want celebration. She had another idea. I want to build something, she said one afternoon. From scratch. Walter looked up from the socket set. You mean a plane? Rosie shook her head. A trainer module, a simulator, for the other kids. The hangar went quiet. Calvin blinked. You want to build a flight sim? Sorta, not digital, real, a mechanical trainer, with dials, switches, the real stuff. Rosie, Walter said gently, that's a big project. She nodded. That's why I need help. Walter laughed. Calvin beamed, and wings over. Water got its second mission. The build took all summer. Rosie became the unofficial forewoman, drawing on cardboard, scribbling wires and switch positions. Ray taught her how each gauge worked. Walter provided scrap parts. Calvin sourced old cockpit panels from retired jets. The result? A cockpit shell. Half plywood, half steel, all heart. It didn't fly, but it taught how to fly. A perfect tactile learning tool for kids like Rosie. By September, they'd installed it in the corner of Hangar 3 under a handmade banner, Rosie's rig, touch the sky. On the first day of classes, 20 kids filed in. Most were younger than Rosie. None had ever touched a real plane. But they had her. Rosie taught her first lesson like a captain addressing her crew. Hands steady, eyes bright. The sky doesn't care how old you are, she said. It only cares how ready you are. And then she flipped the starter switch on the rig. Lights blinked, gauges spun, and 20 pairs of eyes lit up. That night, Rosie sat outside the hangar with Walter, watching a small plane blink across the sky. Think I'll fly for real someday? She asked. Walter sipped his tea. No, he said. I know you will. And beside them, the wind carried the scent of oil and ozone, of machines and dreams and metal wings unfolding in the dark. Autumn hit North Grove like a signal flare. Mornings turned crisp, carrying the scent of burnt leaves and jet oil through the hangar doors. Rosie Cartwright had just turned 11, and while most kids her age celebrated with cake and glitter, Rosie had asked Calvin McKinley for something different. Can I co-pilot a real plane? The request hit the air like a thunderclap. Walter choked on his coffee. Ray paused mid-wrench. And Calvin? He just smiled. We'll see. But Rosie knew what we'll see meant. It meant maybe. It meant there was still air under her wings. The weeks that followed were the busiest of Rosie's life. Wings over water had expanded. Kids were coming, in from neighboring towns. Calvin had managed to negotiate free weekly transport through a small charter company, and even got the local school board to approve an experimental curriculum on aviation principles, led, of course, by Ray and Walter. But Rosie had a new obsession, the Piper Cherokee. The same bird she had tested all summer. She wasn't done with it, not by a long shot. She wanted it to fly, ground certified, Walter reminded her as they examined the panel. I know, Rosie said, but if it could fly, wouldn't that be kind of magic? He paused. Magic's expensive. Not if you believe in sweat and spare parts. That night, she drafted a repair plan. It took up 10 pages of a spiral notebook, every item logged, every tool accounted for. She even created a parts sourcing strategy based on eBay, surplus stores, and local donations. Calvin reviewed the plan in his office the next morning and sat back stunned. "She's 11, he said to Ray, "and this reads like a proposal from Lockheed Martin." Ray smiled. "That kid doesn't tinker, she orchestrates." By Halloween, the Piper's fuselage had been resealed, the wings re-riveted with carbon reinforcements. Ray walked Rosie through the avionics, what little there were, and let her practice simulated takeoffs in the rig, then in the real cockpit. Using battery-powered dummy systems, they called it ghost piloting. Walter handled the big stuff, fuel lines, electrical rewiring, propeller testing. Rosie, though, was the heart. She didn't just fix the plane, she talked to it. "You want to fly again," she whispered once, tightening the yoke mount. "Don't worry, I'll get you there." Calvin, in the meantime, had become a man with a growing reputation. A reporter from Wingspan Monthly came down and wrote a spread about the kid-powered flight school. Photos of Rosie in oil-stained overalls standing beside the simulator rig made the front page. People started calling her the Hangar Hawk. Rosie hated the nickname, but Calvin had it framed. Then came the letters. From retired pilots, mechanics, even NASA interns, donations trickled in. One even came from Calvin's estranged brother, a pilot-turned-lawyer in Seattle. He mailed a check and a note that read, "Maybe Dad would have lived longer if he saw." This, Calvin kept that letter in his wallet. By Thanksgiving, Rosie's Piper had a new name, Hopebird. She painted it by hand in careful, blocky letters along the side. And one cold morning, Ray climbed into the co-pilot seat beside her and said 6 words Rosie had been waiting for. "Let's taxi her to the line." Rosie blinked. "You mean on the runway?" "Taxi only," Ray clarified. "No lift, not yet." But Rosie's grin could have powered a city. Walter supervised from the control cart. Calvin stood by the hangar's edge with a camera and the necklace around his neck, those small pilot wings glinting under a low November sun. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared. Rosie's fingers danced over the throttle. Slowly, carefully, they rolled forward. The old Piper shuddered at first, like a sleepy animal stirred awake. But then it glided, wheels whispering over the tarmac, like it remembered every mile it had ever flown. "Keep it slow," Ray said. "You're driving a memory." Rosie bit her lip, focused, heart pounding. At the end of the runway, she eased the plane into a wide turn. Then for just a moment, she whispered under her breath, "Someday, I'll take you up there." And somehow, Ray heard her. "I know you." "Will Hawk," Rosie groaned. "Don't call me that." That night, while the hangar lights dimmed and the Piper rested under a tarp, Calvin pulled Rosie aside. "I spoke to someone at the FAA. Rosie frowned. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," he smiled. "You're doing everything right. They have a mentorship program for gifted youth. You'd be the youngest ever." Her jaw dropped. "But it's serious," he said. "Tests, hours, structure, no more winging it." Rosie nodded. "Good. I'm tired of winging it." The papers arrived in December. The application was thick, but Rosie tore through it like a challenge course. The final requirement? A personal essay. She titled it, "I Fixed a Jet by Accident, but I Fly on Purpose." In it, she wrote, "My name is Rosie Cartwright. I'm 11. I like flying because it feels like sky and electricity and puzzles and dreams. Planes talk if you listen. I didn't mean to fix one. I meant to understand it. But then I heard it say thank you. That's when I knew. I want to be the kind of person who makes metal feel thankful again." She sealed the envelope, kissed it, and gave it to Ray to mail. Christmas came. Then New Year's, no word, until a white envelope appeared on the hangar table one icy morning. Rosie stared at it like it might explode. Ray nodded. Calvin leaned against a propeller, silent. Rosie opened it with shaking hands. She read the first line, then screamed, "I'm in!" The hangar erupted in cheers. Walter lifted her off the ground. Ray saluted. Calvin pulled the necklace from under his shirt, unclasped it and pressed it into Rosie's palm. "You've earned these," he whispered. Rosie stared at the tiny silver wings, tears welling up. "They were my dad's," he said. "Now they're yours." And as the hangar lights glowed warm against the winter snow outside, Rosie Cartwright knew something for sure. She hadn't just fixed a jet. She had ignited a future. Rosie Cartwright didn't just start the year as an aviation prodigy. She entered it like a force of nature, powered by jet fuel and dreams. With the FAA mentorship program secured, her world tilted, expanded, lifted. She wasn't just tinkering in a hangar anymore. She was training. The first time she opened the FAA materials, Ray joked, "You planning to pass flight theory before your next birthday?" Rosie didn't look up from the booklet. "I was planning on next month." The adults laughed, but they weren't surprised. Each morning, Rosie biked to the hangar through snow and wind. She kept the pilot wings Calvin gave her pinned inside her jacket. She never let them out of her sight. They weren't just a gift, they were a legacy. Inside, Ray had transformed a corner office into Rosie's classroom. Laminated airspace charts covered one wall, engine diagrams another. A whiteboard became her terrain, filled with lift equations, thrust vectors, and wind shear simulations. She studied with a hunger usually reserved for lost souls finding religion. Walter caught her once, asleep at the desk, cheek resting on a page about fuel mixture ratios. "She's going to be dangerous," he whispered to Calvin. "In all the right ways," Calvin replied, but something bigger stirred beneath the wings of Wings Over Water. One morning, a call came from someone unexpected. Evelyn Hawthorne, head of the regional STEM grant board and a former Air Force test pilot. "I've read the article. Seen the footage. This girl's the real deal." She wanted to fund an expansion, not just a bigger hangar, a new training division, simulators, scholarship pathways. And Rosie, she would be its face. Not a mascot, Evelyn said. A model. Rosie was in the middle of testing fuel cell circuits when Calvin told her, "You want me to what? Speak in front of people?" "Yes." "At a science conference." She paled. "Can't I just fly over them?" The day of the conference, Rosie wore her patched denim jacket, the necklace tucked under her collar. She spoke to a room filled with engineers, educators, and aerospace executives. She opened with, "Hi, I'm Rosie. I'm 11. I fixed a plane by accident, but everything since then has been on purpose." They laughed. Then they listened. When she finished, there was a standing ovation. Later that night, alone with Ray, she said, "That was scarier than wind shear." "You did great," Ray replied. Rosie grinned. "Can we go home now? I have homework and a plane to finish." Back at Wings Over Water, something had shifted. People began to show up just to see her. Kids brought their own broken drones. Parents asked for advice. Mechanics from nearby airfields offered mentorship hours. And one afternoon, as Rosie sat beneath the wing of Hopebird, sketching her next project, a black car pulled into the lot. Out stepped a man in a dark suit. He moved like someone used to command. "Rosie Cartwright?" he asked. She looked up, blinking. "Yeah?" He handed her a letter. "You've been invited to the Presidential Youth STEM Gala. Washington, April. You'll receive the Golden Horizon Medal for Innovation." Rosie just stared at him. "Is that real?" He smiled. "Very." Then he looked up at Hopebird. "This the plane you fixed?" "She fixed herself," Rosie said. "I just listened." He walked around the fuselage. "You gave an old machine a second life. That's not listening, that's legacy." Spring thawed the airstrip. Ray began letting Rosie taxi alone. Calvin filed for a full experimental certification on Hopebird, listing Rosie as a technician of record, unusual but not impossible, given her FAA connection. Then came the biggest surprise of all. It arrived in a sealed tube. Rosie opened it and unrolled a massive blueprint, hand-sketched with notes in the margins. It was titled Project Hawkfire. At the bottom, in cursive, inspired by Rosie, designed for youth pilots. Let's build something new. Signed, Evelyn Hawthorne. Rosie sat down slowly, staring at the design. It was a 2-seat training glider, small but mighty, capable of full manual and autopilot modes, designed specifically for youth education and safety. Calvin knelt beside her. She wants you to help lead the first prototype team. Rosie's eyes filled. I thought I was just learning. You are. But now you're teaching too. Rosie accepted the challenge. She studied glider dynamics, ran software simulations, argued with engineers over rivet spacing. She recruited 2 friends from Wings Over Water and even convinced Ray to teach a nighttime seminar called Aerodynamics for the Ambitious. Construction began in May. Every weekend, the team assembled in the hangar. And each day, Hope Bird watched, quietly proud, and then, one evening after the last bolt was checked, Rosie stood back. It was beautiful. Hawkfire stood gleaming under the floodlights, its wings folded like a bird in prayer, its nose sleek, curved toward sky. We'll fly her next week, Ray said, but Rosie shook her head. No. Ray blinked. No, we fly her tomorrow, before anyone else, just us. Dawn broke golden. Rosie. Suited up, heart racing, she wore her wings pinned outside today, for luck. For legacy, Walter gave her a silent thumbs up. Calvin handed her a clipboard with the checklist. Ray climbed into the rear seat. Ready? Rosie nodded. The winch engaged. Hawkfire rolled. Wind building, cables tightening. Then they were airborne, smooth, silent, graceful. Rosie whooped. Ray laughed behind her. The clouds opened like doors, and Rosie Cartwright, kid, mechanic, dreamer, soared. Not by accident, not as a joke, but on purpose. With purpose, for the future. By midsummer, Rosie Cartwright's name had become a whispered legend in classrooms, airfields, and online forums. Not just as the little girl who fixed a jet, but as a symbol of something far greater, resilience, grit, flight through turbulence. But even legends aren't immune to storms. The Hawkfire prototype was now in demand. Schools from across the country requested demo flights. STEM programs wrote in, asking Rosie to speak, lead, teach. She was 11, and her calendar looked like that of a retired astronaut. At first, she loved it. The travel, the talks, the kids. Her age asking if she really rewired a jet, if she really could fly solo. She'd grin and nod. But inside, something was shifting. Too many eyes. Too many adults trying to package her like a headline. You're not a brand, Ray warned her. One night, you're a kid, a brilliant one, but still a kid. I know, Rosie said, but her voice was hollow because deep down she was tired. Tired of interviews, tired of smiling, tired of being on. All she wanted was a wrench in her hand and an engine to whisper to. Then came the gala, the Golden Horizon. National STEM Awards, hosted in D.C., televised, prestigious beyond belief. Rosie was nominated as the youngest recipient ever. But the pressure was suffocating. Walter tried to cheer her up with a joke. You want me to dress like a flight steward and announce you on stage? Calvin offered. We don't have to go. We can stay here. Take the Hawkfire to the Rockies instead. But Rosie shook her head. I have to. If I don't go, the programs might lose funding. The kids who need this, they won't get it. So she went. Hair done, shoes polished, pilot wings gleaming. She smiled through the ceremony, gave the speech, posed for photos. But when she returned home, she didn't unpack for 3 days. The next time Ray checked the hangar, she found Rosie sitting alone under Hope Bird, staring up at the curved belly of the plane. What if this gets too big? She asked softly. What if it already is? What if I forget what I love and just become an image? Ray sat beside her, leaning back against a toolbox. You remember what you told me the first day you came here? About how machines listen? Rosie nodded. Well, it's time you listen too. To yourself. Your heart. If something feels too heavy, you say no. This world, it'll take everything unless you set boundaries. Rosie looked at her, tears brimming. But what if I let people down? You won't, Ray said firmly, but you will lose yourself if you don't protect your peace. Rosie took a step back from the spotlight. She turned down 2 TV offers, declined a national tour, focused on finishing school and spending afternoons in the hangar. With her boundaries clear, she came back stronger. She rebuilt an old biplane with Calvin, just for fun. She started mentoring younger kids at Wings Over Water. She and Ray even developed a mechanical scavenger hunt where kids had to decode clues using real engine diagrams to win flight lessons. It was a hit. Every Saturday, the hangar buzzed with laughter, learning, and curiosity. Then one day, a letter arrived from overseas. A girl named Noor, in a refugee camp in Jordan, had seen a translated version of Rosie's speech. "I want to be like you," Noor wrote. "But we have no planes, only dust, only dreams." Rosie read the letter, over and over. Then she had an idea. Within a month, she and Ray built an online course using salvaged tablets, video walkthroughs, and printable blueprints. They called it Wings Without Borders. It taught the basics of aviation using everyday materials, bike parts, batteries, even kites. Rosie filmed the videos herself, unscripted, in the hangar. They shipped the first kits to Noor's camp, then to villages in Kenya, schools in Guatemala, and youth shelters in Detroit. It spread faster than anyone expected. In just 4 months, over 22 countries had access. The world had asked Rosie to become a star. Instead, she became a beacon. But with every flight, there are headwinds. A report surfaced online, accusing Wings Over Water of violating safety regulations by allowing underage, unlicensed individuals to conduct aircraft maintenance. The accusation was clearly aimed at Rosie. Reporters pounced, interviews twisted facts, headlines screamed, "Is the sky too big for one girl?" Ray slammed her laptop shut. "They want to turn this into a scandal." Calvin growled, "I've filed every form. She's cleared on every mentorship clause. This is garbage." But Rosie stayed calm. "We'll answer with facts and grace." She held a live-stream Q&A citing FAA guidelines, showing her logged hours, her mentor logs, the observer credentials. She ended with, "Learning isn't illegal. It's what keeps the world flying." The response? Overwhelming support. Pilots, engineers, astronauts, even a former NASA commander shared her video. The FAA released a statement supporting youth engagement under mentorship protocols. The haters went quiet. Autumn came. Rosie grew another inch. The second Hawkfire prototype launched, with flight teams in 4 states. She received her youth flight certificate and officially co-founded the non-profit Sky Routes with Ray. Its mission: to build flight pathways for every child with a dream, no matter where they were born or what their hands hold today. And one quiet evening, she stood alone at the end of the runway, the sky purple with dusk. She pulled the necklace from under. Her jacket, the one Calvin had given her, the one from his father, the pilot wings, still polished, still proud, she held them up to the fading sun. "Thank you," she whispered. "We're still flying." The winter wind had settled over the tarmac like a silver veil, frosting the hangar roof and dusting the jet's wings with ice crystals. Rosie stood bundled in her oversized bomber jacket, staring at the digital display inside the cockpit of the Hawkfire 2. It blinked erratically. "That's not right," she muttered. Ray peered over her shoulder. "Voltage drop again?" Rosie nodded, tapping the gauge. "It's the cold. The auxiliary batteries aren't holding current past startup. They're not failing, just freezing." Calvin, arms crossed, leaned against the hangar door. "You're suggesting we design a cold start sequence for a plane that's supposed to fly at 40,000 feet? Rosie grinned. "Not just suggesting." Ray laughed, her breath fogging the air. "Of course, she already sketched it." They spent the rest of the day knee-deep in frost-resistant composite housing designs and redundant heating loops. The system wasn't just innovative, it was elegant. By evening, the Hawkfire powered up with a warm hum, despite the snow falling steadily outside. "Cold-proofed," Rosie declared. "We should call it Frostbite," Calvin snorted. "That name's already taken." But beneath the laughter, something deeper stirred in the group, a feeling that this wasn't just another upgrade. It was a metaphor. Even the best designed things need warmth to start. In early January, Skyroutes announced its first major collaboration with the United Earth Education Coalition. They would provide mobile aviation labs to rural schools, where kids could learn the basics of flight mechanics, physics, and navigation using decommissioned cockpit models and kits Rosie herself helped design. The first site was a reservation in Montana. Rosie insisted on flying there herself. When the Hawkfire descended over the White Plains and snowy forests, she spotted a long line of children already gathered outside a modest community center, waving up at the sky. Rosie grinned. Through the windshield, she wasn't a mystery to them. They knew her. Inside, she ran demonstrations, helped a boy wire his first voltage sensor, and handed out flight goggles to each student like they were medals of honor. One girl, no older than 7, hugged her and said, "I'm building wings too. Paper ones for now, but one day, real." Rosie knelt, looked her in the eyes and said, "They're already real. Flight starts in here," she said, touching the girl's chest. "Then it grows out." But not every mission soared. The third school on the tour, deep in the bayous of Louisiana, was barely holding together. The classrooms were cramped, leaking, and underfunded. The principal met them with tired eyes and quiet desperation. "We've been waiting for change a long time," she said. "No one believed it would come by air." That night, Rosie sat on the jet's wing under the stars, scribbling furiously. In her notebook, when Calvin approached, she looked up and whispered, "We have to do more." "You already are," he replied. "No, not just teach, build." That's when Skyroutes changed again. They began constructing modular air labs, shippable, solar-powered classrooms with wings that folded out like origami. Rosie called them Nest. Pods they could be dropped anywhere, heat themselves, teach anyone. Funding surged. The world began to see Rosie not just as a prodigy, but as a force. One evening, a letter arrived, not from a student or a fan, but from the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. They wanted to feature Hopebird, the jet Rosie had fixed, the jet that started it all. Walter's eyes teared up as he read the email aloud in the hangar. "It'll be preserved, restored, honored." Rosie walked to the plane and laid her hand on its nose cone. "Only if we fly it there ourselves," the board agreed. And so, 6 months after it had been grounded in a forgotten hangar, Hopebird took flight again, this time with Rosie at the co-pilot seat, Walter beside her, and Ray flying as chase in the Hawkfire. As they approached D.C., Rosie looked down over the city she had once given a speech in, feeling its pulse below. They landed to a crowd, not just press, kids, mechanics, dreamers, engineers, people who knew what that little girl had done. She climbed down the ladder and stood beneath the wings, smiling at the jet that had changed her life. Hopebird was enshrined beside Amelia Earhart's Lockheed Vega. A plaque beneath it read, "Restored by Rosie Cartwright, age 11, reminding the world that even the forgotten can fly again." That night, alone in her bunk in the jet dorm, Rosie stared at the ceiling. "Where do we go from here?" she whispered. The answer came not in words, but in visions. She saw a plane powered not by fuel, but by sunlight. She saw classrooms not built on land, But suspended in the sky, she saw children navigating by stars, not screens, and she knew this was only the beginning. The first storm came not from the skies, but from the ground. Rosie Cartwright, now 12, had spent the last year designing, flying, teaching, and inspiring at a scale no child in recent memory ever had. But the more she flew above the clouds, the more turbulence formed below. It began with a series of articles, well-written, well-researched, and completely skeptical. Is Rosie Cartwright a prodigy or a publicity project? Sky routes, under scrutiny, child pilot or PR prop. Each article questioned how someone so young could legitimately lead a non-profit, influence aviation policy, and coordinate funding across 5 continents. Her name, her image, her work. They were real. But the world needed something to doubt, and Rosie had grown used to being underestimated. She read every word, and instead of shrinking, she answered. Not with anger, not with PR campaigns, with blueprints, with science, with results. She published her schematics for the nest pods in open source, allowing engineers worldwide to review, replicate, and refine them. When experts analyzed them, the verdict was unanimous. Not only sound, they're elegant, ingenious. But even as Rosie rose above the noise, a new challenge approached on wings. The World Youth Innovation Council invited Sky Routes to present at the Global Flight Summit in Singapore, an event attended by aviation leaders, government ministers, and CEOs of aerospace giants. Rosie hesitated. I'm not a suit and tie person, she muttered, cradling a fuel cell prototype on her workbench. You're not here to fit in, Ray reminded her. You're here because no one else can do what you do. Rosie nodded slowly. Okay, but I'm not bringing slides. Calvin grinned. You're bringing engines, aren't you? She smirked. Singapore was a storm of languages, flashing cameras, and sky-high expectations. The Marina Bay hangars held full-scale airships, AI-guided drones, and billion-dollar vertical lifters. And then there was Rosie, with grease on her hands, a tool belt on her hip, and a jet model named Sparrowlight, folded into a shipping crate. She stepped up to the stage wearing her pilot wings, not the polished ones from gala nights, but the old worn brass ones Calvin had given her. She didn't give a speech, she gave a demonstration. Rosie walked up to the crate, pulled off the cover, and revealed the Sparrowlight, a single-seat glider powered by ambient thermal columns and kinetic charge recovery. It needed no fuel, no batteries, only sky. She snapped the frame open, adjusted the flex foil wings, and rolled it toward the runway. It's not just for flight, she said to the stunned audience. It's for access. A child in the Andes, the Sahara, or the Outback. If they can build this, they can learn to fly. A hush fell over the crowd. Rosie climbed in, strapped herself tight, and with a short toe assist, launched into the wind. She caught a thermal updraft, spiraled over the city, and glided for 7 full minutes, looping low over the skyline before landing precisely on the summit's central pad. When she stepped out, applause shook the floor. That night she was offered sponsorship deals from 3 major aviation firms. She declined all of them. I'm not here to sell, she said. I'm here to build what the world forgot it needed. Sky Routes' expansion became exponential. Rosie and Ray launched the Skyborne Nations program, partnering with regional builders and student engineers to create flight villages, small campuses, with dorms, maker labs, and short-field runways. Within 6 months, 4 villages were launched in Mongolia, Bolivia, Malawi, and the Ozarks. Rosie visited each one, not as a figurehead. As a builder, she slept in canvas tents, taught soldering classes, crawled through engine bays with 12-year-olds holding LED flashlights in their mouths. In Bolivia, a boy named Mateo rewired a telemetry system using copper wires from a wind chime and a power cell from a broken solar lamp. You think in motion, Rosie told him. That's what flight is. In Mongolia, she watched a girl take her first glide from a snowy ridge in a hand-assembled kite wing she called Ghost Hawk. Sky routes was no longer a movement. It was a revolution. But revolutions draw resistance. High-profile senator in the US began calling for stricter regulation of youth aviation. He introduced a bill known as the Ground-Bound Act, arguing that children have no place in cockpits or control towers. He used Rosie's name directly. Skyroute's operations in the US were threatened. Funding slowed. Airfields grew hesitant to host Rosie's camps. In one interview, Rosie responded calmly, "I understand fear, but fear has never once invented a jet. Fear didn't build bridges or rockets or the wheel. If a child shows the will to fly, we have two choices: guide them safely or get out of their way." Her words went viral, but it wasn't enough. The bill passed the Senate committee. Rosie requested a private hearing before the House Aviation Subcommittee. She was granted 15 minutes. She flew to D.C. in Hopebird 2, the second-generation twin-engine trainer she'd designed with Ray. When she stepped into the chamber, she wore a simple grey jumper, a backpack with folded schematics, and her necklace tucked into her shirt. "I'm not here to defend myself," she said to the panel. "I'm here to defend the future." She told them about Noor, who built her first capacitor using foil from a food wrapper, about Matteo, who taught himself circuit logic using broken toys, about herself, age 9, sitting under a broken plane, seeing not failure, but possibility. She laid out her proposal: national mentorship networks, registered adult pilots supervising youth work, curriculums based on Skyroute's success, accountability without erasure. The room went silent. The chairperson stood. "Miss Cartwright, you just rewrote our policy book." The Ground-Bound Act stalled. Sky routes gained federal recognition. 1 year later, Rosie stood in the control tower of Sky Village, New Zealand, where children aged 10 to 16 conducted full-spectrum glider tests. She was no longer the only child in the room with a dream and tools to chase it. She was now surrounded by thousands. As she watched a group of girls taxi out in a twin-seat glider of their own design, Ray stepped beside her. "Do you miss the quiet hangar?" she asked. Rosie smiled. "No, because this was always the hangar, the whole world. We just needed enough light to see it." That night, as the sky turned violet and gold, Rosie pulled the worn necklace from under her collar. She held the wings in her palm. Brass darkened by time, edges smoothed by years of belief. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She was no longer a girl fixing planes as a joke. She was the one who made the sky home for those who never thought they could belong there. The stars shimmered like chips of fireglass above the Pacific Rim when Rosie Cartwright received the message that would change everything. International Flight Council, urgent request. Global Aviation Youth Summit proposal, review and lead it. 15, Rosie had already transformed how the world thought about flight education. But this was different. This was about sovereignty in the sky. Her name had made it onto the short list of delegates to help shape the first ever Sky Treaty, a cooperative agreement to regulate airspace, drone paths, green aircraft standards, and global pilot mentorship networks. She read the proposal 3 times, then looked out over Sky Village, Taiwan, where 2 boys were testing a solar glider by moonlight. "I have to go," she whispered. The summit was held in Reykjavik, Iceland. Leaders from 71 nations, CEOs of aviation firms, youth innovators, tech giants, politicians, skeptics, engineers. Rosie walked in not as a novelty but as a force. At the opening round table, she took her seat beside a skeptical Australian aviation commissioner and the head of the Indian Aeronautics Institute. They looked at her, then her age, then her worn brass wings. She looked back and smiled. Let's build airspace we're not afraid to share. The summit lasted 11 days. Every night, Rosie worked through drafts, scribbled formulas, ran crosswind simulations, and drafted a model called the Sky Grid, a cooperative international protocol using low-altitude mesh navigation for youth. Glider corridors, enabling safe training zones across rural and developing regions. Some nations pushed back. "She's idealistic," one diplomat said. "This isn't a playground." But when Rosie unveiled the data, collision reduction rates, atmospheric impact modeling, local youth job projections, the doubters fell silent. She didn't argue. She just demonstrated. Her influence grew. Meanwhile, trouble brewed at home. Skyroutes USA faced abrupt restrictions after a powerful industrial lobbying group filed an injunction claiming the non-profit was dismantling established aviation hierarchies. Airfields rescinded access. Licensing stalled, and Ray received a quiet warning from a FAA official. Someone's trying to freeze her out. Rosie, midway through the summit, flew home, not commercially. In her own Hopebird the 3 prototype, now equipped with a hybrid atmospheric condenser engine, able to gather and recycle air humidity as cooling fuel. She landed at a closed gate. The airport wouldn't let her through, so she climbed the fence. She held a press conference in front of Skyroute's first hangar. "Progress isn't meant to be polite," she began. "It's meant to be shared. And when gatekeepers lock out children from learning to fly, it isn't about safety. It's about power." Her words hit harder than expected. Within days, youth across 34 countries launched a coordinated Skyroutes build-in, a synchronized global effort to showcase youth-designed aircraft, drone systems, and control simulations. It was peaceful, elegant, and unstoppable. Rosie returned to Reykjavik for the final vote. The Sky Treaty passed, unanimously, and Clause 7.1 was named the Cartwright Clause, protecting youth innovation programs from political sabotage and mandating international mentorship networks for under-resourced students. It was the first time a teenager had ever shaped a global aviation law. When asked for comment, Rosie only said, "The sky is not a property, it's a promise." After the summit, she was approached by a tall man in a 3-piece suit. He introduced himself as Dr. Elijah Marrow, head of the Marsport Aerodynamics Division. "I've read everything you've done," he said. "I've only just started." She replied. He smiled. "Would you consider designing not just for Earth, but for orbit?" Rosie blinked. "What do you mean?" He handed her a classified file. Inside, the blueprints of a low-gravity launch glider designed for use on Mars' thin atmosphere. "Your models," he said, "are closer than anyone's." Rosie looked up at the stars. Weeks later, back at Sky Village, Australia, Rosie started working on Project Ether, a near-space glider designed to train youth in simulated low-atmosphere flight. She involved every flight village. Each student contributed to one segment of the design. She printed updates on fiber-carbon wings, ran stress tests in weather tunnels, and broadcast the simulation videos live across a network of 27 countries. Children built, children flew, children led. And Rosie, now 16, began preparing for her first near-orbital test. But at night, when no one watched, she'd still sit alone in the hangar, staring at the little pilot wing necklace Calvin had once given her. It was scratched now, faded, yet more precious than gold, because it wasn't just a symbol of who she was. It was a memory of who believed in her before the world ever did. The world had changed. At 16, Rosie Cartwright stood not only as a symbol, but as a pioneer of a new era, one where the sky no longer belonged to the few, but to all who dared to dream, build, and fly. Project Ether was nearing its first test flight, a near-orbital glider capable of simulating the harshest environments beyond Earth's atmosphere. It was the culmination of years of work, the efforts of thousands of youth from every corner of the globe, and a promise for humanity's future among the stars. The morning of the test dawned cold and clear at Sky Village, Australia. The massive hangar doors slowly opened to reveal the gleaming craft, sleek yet sturdy, with delicate wing structures woven from carbon fiber and nanomaterials. Around the perimeter, hundreds of young pilots and engineers gathered, their eyes shining with hope and anticipation. Rosie moved through the crowd, greeting faces she had known since her earliest days, children whose lives had been touched and transformed by the power of flight. Among them was Matteo, now 17, a lead engineer on the project who had once built circuits from wind chimes. Noor, the young prodigy who had developed the software guiding the glider's systems. And Ray, her lifelong partner and mentor, standing proudly at her side. Today, Rosie addressed the crowd, voice steady yet charged with emotion, we take a step not just forward but upward, toward a horizon we once thought unreachable. The countdown began. Ground crews checked every system meticulously. Cameras streamed live to millions worldwide. At the control panel, Rosie took her seat, donning her flight helmet with the worn pilot wing necklace resting just beneath her collar. As the glider lifted from the runway, a hush fell over the onlookers. The craft climbed steadily, reaching the stratosphere where the sky deepened to an endless indigo. Sensors recorded every metric flawlessly. The glider soared beyond Earth's immediate atmosphere, simulating Martian gravity and the vacuum of near space. Rosie's heart pounded with a mix of excitement and reverence. This was more than a flight. It was a testament to what a child's curiosity and determination could accomplish. Hours passed. The glider completed its mission and safely returned, landing to thunderous applause. Rosie emerged from the cockpit, tears glistening in her eyes. The journey that began as a playful experiment under a broken plane had evolved into a movement shaping humanity's destiny. Later that evening, as the sun set over the Sky Village, Rosie held the pilot wing necklace in her palm, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future. It was a symbol of belief, of tenacity, and of a sky forever open to those brave enough to reach. From a little girl fixing a private jet as a joke to a leader inspiring generations, Rosie Cartwright had truly become the girl who taught the world to fly. The end. Every day brings a new story. Hit subscribe and keep watching.